Today on the podcast, I have AG Lambert. This conversation was super interesting for me. It's a conversation about a chief product officer, somebody who's built products for millions of people, led large organizations, has grown product lines from $6 million to $100 million in ARR, decides to leave his job and start all over from scratch. And so we talk a little bit about that journey today and what it was like to go back and use AI tools, to not have this large infrastructure of people around him to help him and build from ground zero. We talk about trends in product management and really what early stage founders should really focus on. This is a fun conversation. It was great to reconnect with AG, and I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. Welcome, to the podcast, AG. I appreciate you taking the time. It's good to see you.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to see you.
It has been a while. So in full disclosure, you and I worked together at Concur a number of years ago. We were just kind of talking about, it's been about 10 years since I left Concur. And you and I worked together in product. And so we'll get to that for a little bit. But maybe talk to me a little bit, give me the Cliff Note version about just your career, like what you've been doing. You were talking about before we got on air, you and I have both been doing this for about 30 years. And so maybe talk to me a little bit about kind of what you've done and what the through line is.
Yeah. I think the through line for me has always been product and customers. So I started in a marketing job at Autodesk 30 years ago and designed software. And then Autodesk bought a company that, was one of their ISVs. And I sort of got into working with the product team on that. And then that sort of progressed, both with startups and with big companies, and then through Concur for 11 years. And then the last 4 years, I was at Navex, which was a governance, risk, and compliance software company.
The one thing you kind of left out was your background. If I remember correctly, it's physics undergraduate and then English literature. And so I'm kind of curious on like how did that tie to getting a marketing job at Autodesk?
Yeah, so it's interesting. It tied in. First, you got to tie the two together. So physics and English literature. People are like, "What the heck? What's going on with that?" And the way I used to put it is, they're both about trying to understand how the world works, right? So literature is how people think, and physics is how things actually happen. And so that kind of ties together. In terms of tying to Autodesk, I don't think it really tied, except for a sense of curiosity and trying to figure things out, and an interest in building product. I got to Autodesk because my father had a small land development business. And because of my background with the family business and in construction, Autodesk wanted to do better marketing to architects, engineers, and builders. And so that was my in to get in. But there was no real direct link. And I don't think there has to be a direct link between what you do as an undergrad and how you get into, the next role. You just got to make that connection of curiosity and trying to get something done.
That's interesting. I would say almost like, taking a step further to product, the story is almost the customer experience and the engineering is almost the physics, right? Where it's like a little bit of both. And so I don't know if that, if basically those two pieces show up as you think about designing or working through product, but I do think there is a story element to how customers think and what they want and how they react, because it can be emotional, it can be irrational. And then obviously coding is pretty black and white like physics.
Yeah, it is. It is. And I think you're right. There's, one of the things I've always felt is you need to have the core of being a good product person is customer empathy and understanding their story. Like, what are they trying to do? See the world through their eyes. But then you have to take that and translate that into something your engineering team can build. And so I think you're right. It's not a connection I've made before, but it's a really interesting one of the story of literature and the physics of engineering are, I think I mixed my metaphors, or I reversed my order of metaphors there. But, they definitely come together.
Would you say in general, your left brain, right brain pretty balanced? I mean, is that another way to kind of think about it?
I think so. I think, there's a combo. I'm probably a little more left brain than I am right brain. But I would say that I keep coming back to having that curiosity, both about the story and the engineering, is the critical thing that I think is important.
Yeah, I almost think that's the through line from your education to your career. I mean, and you're obviously a better expert at that than I am, but
Yeah.
like knowing you and doing the research for this, I think that was one thing that kind of jumped through. Maybe going backwards a little bit, I think I had seen something in your LinkedIn feed that kind of jumped out at me a couple weeks ago, and I think precipitated this conversation. I think you wrote something that said AI has changed two things about product management: speed and access, but fundamentally hasn't changed at all. Unpack that for me, and like, what do you mean? What do you mean? What matters?
Yeah. So, when you think about, and I've always been in software, so I'm going to take a software approach. Although I think this does apply to other products as well. But when you think about software, or any product, you start by understanding the market and the customer problem first, right? And understanding that. And I think that's not changed. AI doesn't change that at all. And having that deep understanding of what the customer is trying to do and what their needs are is fundamentally unchanged. But then what do you do with that? How do you get data to support your intuitive understanding? And how do you move that through a process to actually building a product? That's all transformed. Everything along that path is different, and the workflow and the process is changed. So, that's sort of a high level explanation, but things, the fundamental of product management, to my mind, is understanding a customer problem and being able to translate that into a proposed solution. That's unchanged. How you do that is where it's changed.
So I think we have a thesis at Wildfire that probably supports this a little bit. We look for entrepreneurs or founders that actually have deep domain expertise, because we feel like that's not going to get AI'd out. And I think that's kind of what you're saying is a deep understanding of the problem set is the unique piece of it. The how you build it, you can figure that out. And so I do think that most founders screw up on the customer discovery. I think they basically listen to a little bit of what's going on, and then they basically say, I'm going to go build it because I understand. And most of them are building products that nobody really is willing to pay or change their behavior for. And so I think we have a lot of non-differentiated products. One of the things that you said that kind of builds on this was there's a difference between interviews and conversations in that kind of frame. And so maybe unpack that a little bit, or tell me a little bit more about what those differences are, because I think that most founders are not honest with themselves. They basically ask questions for answers they want to hear versus trying to really drive discovery to like understand and refine their hypothesis, not to validate it.
Yeah, I think some of this goes back to that left brain, right brain concept that you just brought up, that you may have a right brain domain expertise. I know the answer to this problem, and you want to reinforce it. But then you need to combine it with your left brain. Let's look at the data, and let's actually have a structured way of gathering this information. And I think one of the things that can be really valuable is having a more structured interview. A conversation's great, but having a structured set of questions that you then take to a series of potential customers in an unbiased way. And I think by setting out the criteria of this is what I'm trying to discover, these are the questions I'm going to ask, creates a framework that creates that removes some of the implicit bias that we all have, because we always think that we know the answer. And having that structured interview can help you move beyond that bias and really understand if my thesis of what the customer problem is resonates across a broader population or doesn't.
I agree with that. I think that AI can play a pretty good role in helping you do that. I think, like, I always think about it as a thought partner. And so it's amazing the places where, it can tell you. So I'll give you an example. I've been trying to get better at podcasting. And so I give it like all my scripts, and I basically say, what did I do well? What did I not do well? And then basically it has a whole set of things for me to work on for the next one. Right. And so I do think that like building the list of interview questions and saying, this is my outcome, grade me on what it is, where I could get better. And then once you do one of these, feeding it back and saying, I have what I started with, here's the transcript, make it better. It is amazing on what you can do. Like even my writing, right? Like I basically have like a style guide that I use. And I basically, you can see the progression from when I first started to where I am today. Like it has definitely gotten better, but like there's still things I need to go work on. And I just think that as a thought partner, these tools can be really good to help you overcome some of those biases and sharpen what you're doing if you have the right mentality about it.
I agree. You can't ignore the tools, but you can't also just follow the tools, right? You need to take them with a grain of salt and then use it to, like you say, as a thought partner. And sometimes you'll disagree with the conclusions, and sometimes you'll be like, that is a good point. I need to change that, right? And move forward.
So one of the other things that struck me about your LinkedIn, and part of the reason was to talk, was you're basically going from, a pretty enterprise environment with lots of people, lots of management, to I'm going to be a single solo person. I'm going to go build an application. I'm going to get my hands dirty. I'm going to think about, what does multi-agent architecture looks like? How do I think about vector search? Like, how do I think about like role access control? These are things you would have put in a PDR, like a requirements document. Now you're responsible for not only the document, but putting it all together and then thinking about selling it. And so, I give you a ton of credit, AG, for throwing off the shackles of a larger organization and basically getting your hands dirty. I think the tools allow you to do that in a different way than we've experienced in our careers. But I'm curious about motivation, and then what have you learned?
Yeah. So motivation, I think, and I said this, I think, in one of my earlier posts. I started with doing just playing with AI, right? And I started trying to set up a website. We're using a website builder, and I found it very unsatisfying. And then I said, well, what do I know about? Well, I know about product management. Well, what if I try to build something that's product management? And so I think my motivation started with, I want to get hands-on with AI, but then it shifted to, I want to do something I know about, kind of like you're talking about with your founders. Get somebody with domain expertise. My domain expertise is product management. So trying to build something in that. And so that was really what drove me into it. And I think what I've learned, there's a lot of things I've learned. I've learned quite a bit about, setting up a software development environment and moving to production, and, things that I knew about as issues, but never had to deal with myself.
Somebody else did that.
Dealt with it. Yeah, exactly. But I think I've also learned, or I've gotten some hypotheses about how AI changes things. Like, I think that product managers need to get their hands dirty in this environment because the AI makes it accessible. And you need to be more aggressive about prototyping and building things to not just validate the idea, but actually build something and show it to people and get feedback and then iterate and try again. And so I think that's something I've learned. And then just, it is amazing how powerful the tools have been. And so I think that is also a learning experience in terms of what it means in terms of, for a software company, how quickly you have to move. Because if the tools are this powerful, then you can't rely on a long development cycle. You've got to move quickly, adjust, move quickly again, adjust. And I think that applies whether you're a solo developer or a big company.
I agree with you. Sometimes it's messy. We look at some of these tools but you can see the potential, no question about it. I guess one of my unpopular theses that I'm kind of curious about is I almost feel like this generation of technology evolution is actually more beneficial for you and I than it is our children. And the piece that I would kind of tie this together is you have 30 years of experience of doing what you do. You know what the process is to get something from concept to shipping. Our kids don't. And so I think that what you're doing in this process using these tools is understanding where your intellect and experience adds value and what you can automate with the tool and when to call kind of BS on it, right? Where it's like you have that kind of instinct of understanding. And I look at my kids and it's like they're super technology forward, but they lack that understanding of how to go from A to D and what the steps are in between and when to call BS on what it's actually providing to you. Any feedback? Does that resonate? Do you challenge that assumption?
It resonates, but I think I would challenge the assumption. It resonates in that I think I'm probably embracing AI more than my children, right? They're kind of saying, I don't know what to do with this. But I think I'm like you say, I've got a basis. But I also think that it's not quite fair to our kids, right? I think that they have an opportunity to develop expertise in a way that we did not. Right. Like you were saying, of having AI as a thought partner. Well, our children are going to have AI as a life partner, frankly, right? Moving forward.
That's true.
And so they're going to be able to iterate and develop their ideas and their expertise in conjunction with these powerful tools. And that will open up new vistas that you and I probably did not have.
Yeah, that's probably true. Yeah, I think it's a good point. I appreciate it. Kind of going back to your earlier comment about just speed, and we're not shipping in quarters; we're shipping weekly, daily, a couple times. How do you think the job of product management, or as a founder, that changes? Right? Like I think that the way that we think about this is different. And the priority and the sense of urgency to get things out and iterate on it is very different. But like going from, an SAP, Concur, Navex, like any of these large companies to doing this on your own, like what fundamentally changes around speed?
Yeah, I think a couple things. One, partially just because I'm doing it on my own, I can say this isn't working and I can tear it all down and redo it, right? I think that's something that larger companies can learn to do, but it's harder for them. And I think the other thing with speed is I just think that the pace of responding to customers has to be faster. Too many times at Concur, at SAP, at Navex, you get a feedback from a customer and you totally agree. This is totally valid, but we can't do anything for 12 months, 24 months. And I think you either need to do it or you need to not do it, but you can't just put it on the shelf for an extended period of time. And to some extent, this has always been true, but I think with AI, it's more true because if you let it get stale, it's going to be irrelevant very quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And so I guess what you're kind of describing is a feedback loop that basically goes from good customer understanding and feedback to here's the product and iterate on it. Do you think that customers are willing to go through that? I guess you and I grew up in like a B2B world, right? We dealt with challenges at Concur where even at times people are telling us you're shipping too much too quickly, right? And so, and yeah, like we still have some scars. And like now it's difficult because the tools are allowing you to do this so quickly and you're asking for feedback to get it. Is this something the actual customer wants? They want the outcome, but do they want the process to get there?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a shift for not just software vendors and founders, but for customers, right? And I think we're all experiencing it. And it's sort of like what we were just talking about with our kids of some people are going to resist it. And I think you have to be sensitive to that. But I believe society is changing, right? That the pace of change is accelerating for all of us, whether we like it or not. So I think you need to be sensitive to your customers, but that doesn't mean, no, we're going to ship once a year because that's the only rate that you can absorb change. There's got to be an attempt and a process to minimize the impact of that change. But the change has to happen steadily. And I think customers are going to realize that quickly because they need it in their business as well.
I think this goes back to like some conversations that we had back in Concur about change management, right? Do you turn off things by default, right? We're allowing the customer to opt into things if they don't want the experience to be changed. So I do think, some of that needs to be thought through and understanding the sensitivity to the customer, but the value that you can drive with it, because the next sales cycle may require that new feature.
Yeah, it needs to be, where possible, opt in. And I think there are some good tools out there that can help, have feature flags of turn it on or off. And, that's another interesting thing I've thought about. And I don't know where it goes, but I think that we may be moving towards more bespoke software, right? Meaning not 100% bespoke, but you need to be able to adapt your software to the needs of each individual customer. And AI gives you more ability to do that because it gives you the scale to change things and create and manage, the options that you might have in your software as you move forward.
Yeah, I think it's a valid point. You spent about what 3 years as CPO at Navex, something like that.
Yeah, Navex. Yep.
Navex, I think you grew international bookings by quite a bit from a growth perspective. I think you had some success on moving NPS in the right direction. You grew that team by quite a bit. And so I'm not trying to be nosy, but like, why the shift, right? Like, was it just a time? Was it like, were you getting to the point where the size and the scale was something you weren't interested in doing? And I guess I'll maybe bring this back to my own Concur experience. I think I left at a time where I just wasn't getting good at the job anymore. I didn't enjoy the scale that I had. There was a lot more politics, and maybe this is part of the acquisition with Concur. But I think my honest answer was, I didn't get up loving that job anymore either. There was a lot of politics. It was about protecting people. It was protecting budgets. It was a lot of HR issues. It was further and further away from product. And so I'm just kind of curious about your experience and looking for the next thing. And it sounds like there was some really good growth for you professionally, but then what is it that you take away from that you want to apply next?
Yeah, I think I'll back up a little bit to leaving SAP and going to Navex. I think becoming part of a management team that could make decisions was liberating, right? And this is not a knock on SAP, but at Concur, even though we had senior roles in the Concur organization, we were mid-level managers in the SAP organization. It's just so big, and that's numbing, right? Sometimes. And so I think as I think about what I'm looking for moving forward is the opportunity to be in that decision-making capability. And if I move forward to Navex, I think the challenge there was executing on strategic goals effectively and moving toward growth, moving beyond just EBITDA to really focus on growth and growth opportunities. And I think one of the disciplines I learned working for a private equity firm is you got to combine the two. You got to combine profitability and growth. But I think that there was sometimes toward the end, there was a lack of strategic vision of where we were going that made it less satisfying. And I think it was just the right time for me and for Navex for us to separate. And so when I look at what I want to do next, I want to find something that is a combination of decision-making, bias toward action, but also a focus toward profitable growth and changing the market moving forward.
As a bunch of people who've left Concur and looked for new jobs, I think that criteria is difficult to find. There's a lot of people that would say, or I would even say personally, that time going from maybe $50, $100 million to, I don't know, 500 million, there was some sweet spot in there for me at Concur where, there was a lot of good execution, there was good strategy, and it was a fun ride. But like thinking back about like finding the next one where the culture's right, you have the right leadership, you have the right investment structure, and you have the right authority. As my career's gone on, it's harder and harder to see all those pieces come together in opportunities, I think.
It's true. I think there has to be compromise. I mean, I think if we go back to the through line of my career, it's been about building. And I can compromise of like, okay, what's this? What's that? Is it perfect? As long as I can build something. And I think that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. Back to what motivated me to build something with AI and kind of go deeper than I thought I would originally. It's because I like building. And I think that'll be the essence of what I want to do next is, can I build?
I think it's good. I think let's go back one more step. You and I overlapped with Concur, and one of the things that I think was a great success for you was the invoice story. So we had an invoice product that I think we probably underinvested in for a lot of time.
We did.
And basically, we looked at it as saying it's another pillar after travel. We have expense that's basically carrying the lion's share. We bought, another company to basically do the travel component, integrate it, and this was going to be the third leg of the stool. I think, where it ended up, it was maybe 5-6 million at the beginning, and you took it to over $100 million. Maybe talk to me a little bit about that experience. There was a lot of pressure. There was a lot of focus. This is a combination of getting salespeople comfortable, basically doing this. It's a talk track and marketing material, and it's also a combination of product, making sure we have the right functionality. So talk to me a little bit about all of those elements, because they cross a lot of different disciplines, and going from, say, $6 million to $100 million, and that growth rate over the time you did is impressive. Every company wants that. And so what are some of the learnings in that process?
Yeah, I think, the first learning, starting at the 5 or 6 million and the underinvestment, is we had a lot of unhappy customers. And so I think the very first step was find out what's pissing the customers off and start fixing it and show the customers that you care and that you're doing something about it. And that was job one. You got to get the customers satisfied. But then I think it shifted to understanding where we fit and where we didn't. And I think that we started off selling invoice to large enterprise customers, and they weren't the right fit. In most cases, if you're a big enterprise, you're going to manage your invoices as part of a complete procure to pay system. And Concur is not the right solution for that. But as we looked at our SMB business, that's where it started to resonate. And that's where we could provide much more value, and even internally, right? Like at Concur, at 400 million in revenue, we had no real procurement system, right? And it was more just make sure Steve approves it before you buy it, if it's a major purchase, or put it on the expense report. And bringing in invoice with a purchase request up front was hugely valuable to smaller and mid-sized companies. And I think finding that sweet spot was important. I think the final aspect, like you're saying, is getting the confidence of the sales team. And I think, that goes back to first getting the customers not pissed off at you so that you've got some references, but then a steady drumbeat of, yes, we can do it. Here's where it's relevant. And then you start to get that success, and then you start replicating it over and over. And, we started in invoice talking about not fancy, here's what we're going to do. We're going to transform the procurement process, but we're going to help you get your paper processed and approved in a pretty simple way, but we're going to do it well. And I think showing that successful basic execution was a foundation to accelerate that growth and build on it over time.
So a couple things I heard in there. One was good segmentation. We were focused on the wrong segment, and so getting to the right segment where there's value to where the product was at was one. The second one was we got to convince you that you can make money at this, right? That's where the sales guys are. They're coin operated. And so my guess is you ended up working with people from a sales perspective on their overlays, right? So these are people that had specialties around it. Our goal is to basically help you close this deal, right? Can't do this for everybody, but really a white glove treatment to start with to get momentum and get people excited about, yes, I made my number. I'm going to club this year. Like there's an incentive for me to go do this. Is that a fair observation or characterization?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fair. And I think the importance of the overlay team went down over time, but it was critical at the beginning, right? People who could, the average Concur rep didn't want to deal with invoice, but they could bring in an overlay rep who could help them through it. And then suddenly their deal is twice or three times as big, and they're going to club. And that makes a big difference.
Was there like a time or an experience that you felt like we turned the corner? Is it a big deal? Is it a release? Is it marketing message? What was it that actually felt like, hey, I'm turning the corner? And maybe it's like a dodecahedron, right? There's a bunch of corners on this. It's not four. But like, I'm curious if there was anything that you kind of go, aha, we're starting to figure this out.
Yeah, it's a good question. And I do think there were a series of corners as opposed to like one aha moment. There was not one big deal. But I think it was, I think it was first finding that right segment, getting the deals that were starting to replicate. And I think the aha moment was when salespeople started to recognize that an invoice deal could be 2 to 3 times as big as an expense only deal or an expense and travel deal. And I think that was a key moment where people are like, huh, like this is a little different, but I could do 4 times the revenue in one deal than just going in with T&E alone. And I think that was like a key moment where people are like, okay, I'm willing to give this a shot because it's a much bigger deal if I land it.
Yeah. Well, at a sales kickoff meeting or seeing it in like a quarterly planning, and they're starting to do that, you got to feel good. Like, we're starting to line up the pieces in that, which is kind of exciting. Yeah. And so that's a fun one. Maybe going back even further too was you spent a lot of time on basically fraud, like basically audit and fraud protection or detection at Concur, and building out that product. I mean, some of this was OCR. We started to get into some machine learning before like all these AI tools came, and so. Talk to me a little bit about the process of thinking about that with the tools you had then versus thinking about it today and how you'd almost redo it. Because I mean, there are so many interesting things that we learned in that process, right? Where the way people thought about fraud in Brazil versus Norway versus Japan were different, right? And so different models, different ways that they thought about it. There's different rules. And so maybe just talk to me a little bit about that experience. Because there was like 100 million transactions. There was over 2,000 customers that adopted it. There was a huge demand from our customer base to basically figure out how to look for fraud without manually doing it with people.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's interesting both in that there was that huge demand well before Gen AI started. And we started, reselling partners to do AI-based fraud detection. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't, but customers wanted it, right? Like it's the promised land that they were looking for. And I think that we learned a lot because we provided audit services done with people. And that gave us a basis to kind of build the model of how we do it with AI. And that allowed us to really have an advantage in terms of detecting not just fraud, but anomalies that were moving through the system. I think the interesting thing moving forward is, to some extent, Gen AI is overturning the apple cart, right? The proprietary ML models that we developed over a series of years for invoice extraction or expense extraction are commodifying, and that it's becoming easier and easier. So it's interesting. I think that the demand is very high, but I think the way that the proprietary data sets are impacting is changing in terms of what that means for products moving forward.
But would you say that the data is the proprietary moat, the tools to analyze and come up with the conclusions or the takeaways is maybe being more commoditized?
Yeah, well, let me explain it a little more. I think that a proprietary ML model is probably less valuable than it used to be because a large language model can probably outperform your proprietary ML model in most cases. Where I think the data creates a moat is because that data is specific to a domain, an industry, and allows you to understand the anomalies relative to what you're seeing. So it's more a benchmark or a comparison. And this is something that came up very much at Navex post Concur, of having a benchmark to say, you're seeing some incidents of harassment in your organization. Is that good or bad? Well, it depends. There's always going to be some unfortunate incidents that happen, and you need to understand: am I above the norm or below the norm? And having that insight into the broad customer set is what's going to be valuable more than a proprietary ML model moving forward.
So one dimension I'd probably add to this is the cost pieces of it, right? I think it's the difference between the U.S. Maybe fascination or leadership on we got to build the absolute best AI models versus kind of what China's doing, right? They're building utilitarian models that are maybe 80%, but a fraction of the cost. And so I do think there's a balance in here where you're looking at like the proprietary models, but a cost structure that works for the business as well as the data to actually provide it. And I think we as product designers and founders are probably not talking about this enough, because at some point in time you got to use these models and it has to be cost effective to do it. Whereas I look at how many tokens I'm burning in a month, it's quite a bit, right? And there's probably some more efficient way to do it. But when you start talking about doing things for 2,000 customers or doing things that are 100 million transactions to review, you got to think about scale.
Yeah, we're getting there, but I think my advice would be don't worry excessively about scale.
At the beginning, anyway.
At the beginning, you gotta get it working, and damn the torpedoes, like full speed ahead, and then you can figure out how to make it cost effective. Because I think you're right, there are ways to drive costs out of it.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about NPS and customer satisfaction. I was thinking about kind of what you did, Navex, from a customer NPS improvement, and then the Concur experience was pretty daunting. I can't remember exactly where you came in, but there was a time when that was a negative number for us, and there were a lot of unhappy customers, and leadership basically tied every single one of our bonuses, whether you're in finance, whether you're on the front lines in sales, whether you're customer support, whether you're an engineer, to basically improving that. And I remember a ton of pushback, right? They're saying, well, I'm an engineer. How is that helping? What am I going to do? But it galvanized us to go from, I'm going to make up numbers because I think it was about -11 to somewhere in the mid 40s, right? Where I think we moved it in the right direction. That is something that I think as I work with companies, getting them to instrumentate that early, and realize, how to manage churn, because obviously that can be a pre-indicator of churn. But getting that done early, and then once you find a problem, how do you think about taking that data and moving it in the right direction? Because some of it can be product, but some of it can be service, some of it can be positioning. I mean, we see this quite a bit. I got a company that I consult with where they sold too high of all the things that they wanted the product to do, and then they implemented it and they got, 80% of it, and they were super unhappy, and that's a hole you got to dig out of.
Right. Setting the right expectations is key to customer satisfaction, right? If you promise the moon and you only deliver a skyscraper, they're going to be disappointed. So, I think I think you're right. There's two pieces to this. One is measuring, right? And I think at Navex, one of the things we did was spend more time and structure how we were getting data from customers. So customer advisory boards per product, getting an idea system, getting feedback into the product organization, and just becoming a little more customer focused helped from a product perspective. I think Navex does a great job actually of trying to provide good service to their customers. So I think it was really the product that was lacking, and we were able to address that. But I remember the Concur experience as well. And it is true that all parts of the organization affect that customer satisfaction. A renewal that comes out of the blue with a significant price increase can be very damaging to customer success. And customer satisfaction. And so you got to look at it holistically of support, finance, engineering quality. We had that challenge early on with the invoice product where, it was falling over at the end of the month. And suddenly this is a mission critical product because you can't close your books and you can't accrue your expenses in a meaningful way when you're putting all your AP through it. And it drives all aspects. So I think what we did at Concur was very instrumental in terms of doing it. At Navex, I think it was more of a product problem that we addressed. But I think you've got to have measurement, both quantitative, like let's do an NPS survey, and qualitative of let's have a customer advisory board, let's have ways of talking to our customers, and then bring that in to say, what are we doing well and what are we not doing well?
Yeah, and I think buy-in from senior leadership too. That's maybe the other part of it is it's not just an initiative that somebody else is doing. It's a collective thing that we all own. I think Concur, we did that well. I've definitely talked to some other companies where, it's the support or the account management organization that owns that. And you're like, then it never goes anywhere.
No.
So maybe talk to me a little bit about kind of the emotional component of it. We see a lot of entrepreneurs that go through this process from going from a decent sized company, they're the domain experts, to building on their own. It's a lonely business. And you lose all these kind of support tentacles and stuff around you to help you be successful. And that might not be somebody actually helping you, but it's somebody to bounce ideas off of. It's an organization that you can kind of rely on. And so you've gone from being kind of a chief product officer at multiple stops, having large staff and organizations, to stop. Now you're a party of one. And so talk to me about, talk to me a little bit about just kind of the support structure around doing that, because it's not easy. I've been a part of 10 different startups over my career, and it's some of the you need support, whether it's community, other people, but you lose that kind of connective tissue in a larger organization when you go to being an individual contributor and starting something on your own.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that there's two aspects, right? The support, the intellectual support you need, and the emotional support you need. And I think the emotional support's been harder, right? So, not to overstate what AI can do, but using a combination of AI tools can give you the opportunity to bounce things off. And sometimes it's not accurate, but it can help, right? I think this would be so much harder if I were not having the ability to bounce ideas off of AI and to iterate in terms of what I'm doing. On the emotional side, I think it's really important to reach out to your network. And, over the past couple of months, I've been iterating with people that I've worked with in the past, and some of whom are in startups, some of whom are still at SAP, some who are, moved on to various companies around the world, and saying, hey, is this useful? How would you use it? And it's important both to get their feedback, but it's also important just to connect and to, talk to somebody and say, am I crazy, or is this actually valuable? And it's as much emotional as it is data driven to have that connection.
I guess my own experience that's probably similar to yours is I miss people to sharpen what I'm doing, right? I think like going from a pool of people that we worked with in Seattle and the networks we had, there were a lot of smart people that would tell me I'm wrong, or not even just tell me I'm wrong, but like sharpen what I'm trying to go do. And, I live in Rapid City, South Dakota, and you come up with all this stuff and people are like, hey, attaboy, great. And he's like, no, I'm sure I could do it better. And so you want people with context that can actually sharpen what you're doing. And it's not that like I need to be like, I actively want feedback to like make it better. Right. And so that's part of what like the podcast and the writing and stuff is doing. But I do think it's an intricate part of doing a startup is not doing it on your own and finding these people that have domain expertise and that can add value to the journey you're on.
Yeah, I think that's right. As I've taken out my solo development to people that I've worked with in the past, I've gotten some, I don't know if I call it harsh feedback, but I've gotten some challenging feedback, right? Like, oh, that's interesting, but that's like, I don't care about competitors, or, I want to focus on my customer, or how are you actually tying that to the outcome of the customer? And I'm like, well, I'm not, So like they've asked me questions that have challenged what I'm trying to do and made me rethink of, am I being ambitious enough, in terms of what I'm trying to build, and shifted that framework. So absolutely, I think you need that. And I probably need more of it, right? Like, working on my own can be limiting, right, in terms of what you're doing.
Yeah. If you think about like where product management's going, and you think about 5 years from now, how does the discipline change, right? We've touched on some of this. I think you're going to say you have to accelerate the process. You're prototyping a lot more. And so that whole process from going from I have a feature idea to I'm shipping it to a customer needs to be massively compressed. But like how does that change like go over the next 5 years? Like what do you envision that looking? Do you think that every product manager has more technical skills and it's probably not going to be, I mean, I think like these tools are getting more democratized so they're easier to use.
Right.
And so I do think that process is going to change, but I'm just kind of curious on what are we doing today that we won't be doing 5 years from now?
It's a good question. I think that a lot of the supporting functions of product management are going to go away, right? And I think this is where there's going to be a differentiation between people who are doing it the old way and people who are doing it the new way, if you will. So I think to some extent, we're going to be operating with more data, but less data processing, if that makes sense, of being able to say, okay, I am going to look at every support ticket that's been raised and understand what they're saying. I'm going to look at the full transcript of what my salespeople are saying to customers. And I can do that with AI. And so I can get, more processing. But then at the same time, I think we're going to have to be, iterating faster. We've been talking agile for 15, 20 years. But I don't think I've been in an organization that's truly agile, right? And I think we can become more. And so back to that speed of getting things out quickly. So what are we going to do more of? How will product management be different? I think product management is going to be iterating faster. It's going to be using more data, but with less time spent on the data, meaning that you're going to have AI support tools that are going to drive that process. And what we're still going to be doing is talking to customers and working through that iteration of making sure you have that customer empathy and understanding to drive it forward. I think there will be less work developing the use cases and PRDs, right? I think AI will take away a lot of that. And we're going to get down to the essence. What I keep saying is the essence of product management, which is I understand the customer problem deeply, and then can translate that into potential solutions and iterate on that faster.
I broadly agree on that. I think the one I would just kind of push on more is creating space to get closer to the customer. If that's really the essence of what you're trying to go do and makes this whole system work, I think that most product managers do not spend enough time with the customer, right? And so if this creates space, realize what you do well and what is the accelerant to that entire process that you just outlined is that domain expertise, is that deep understanding of how and why they use the product makes the flywheel go faster. And really, if you have more space to spend time and learn, it's there.
I completely agree. I think you put that well. I think that as a product manager who's thinking about how do I get better at what I'm doing, you need to strip away the pieces of your job that are not iterating with customers, right? You need to use AI aggressively to automate the portions of your job that are preparing reports, doing competitive analysis, even writing up, requirements or use cases. AI should be able to help you with all of that. And you need to, as you put it, create space and put more of your time, and then use the fact that you've got that time to move faster, right? To be able to prototype and look at different changes, but strip the job down to its base fundamental, the fundamental value you're providing to the organization and to the customer, which is I understand your problem and I can come up with potential solutions.
Yeah, I think that's really good. Well said. Maybe my last question for you, AG, is let's say you're a founder listening to this right now. You have an idea or have a prototype. They're not sure that it's real. What's the one thing you would tell them to do now that they're probably not doing?
I think I would potentially say I would road test the prototype. I don't know if they're doing it or not, but I think don't spend a lot of time trying to code something perfect. Get out there with a prototype and road test it with a bunch of customers. And don't rely just on your own knowledge of the domain. Your own knowledge of the domain is incredibly valuable, but it has to be validated by a series of customers in terms of what they're doing. So road test early, I think would be my advice to a founder. Road test early and don't wait for fully working software in order to do it because you don't need it.
I think it's really good. I think that's dead on. I think that people are afraid and they want to basically continue to add features. And so I think that advice is really good, AG. I appreciate the conversation. This has been really good. It's been great to reconnect. I'm super excited about what you're doing. It's super cool to see you embrace AI and go backwards and get your hands dirty. I think there's a lot of good lessons learned from that. If people wanted to learn more about you or learn more about what you're doing or talk to you more about maybe opportunities, what's the best way to do that?
Probably the best way is to connect with me over LinkedIn. I'm occasionally posting on LinkedIn, not necessarily consistently, but I'm always available to be connected to and to interact with on LinkedIn.
Well, good. AG, thanks again for taking the time. I appreciate you sharing your kind of experience and wisdom, and it's been a fun conversation.
Yeah. Thank you, Todd. Great to connect.
Well, that's the show for today. I really appreciate AG being vulnerable and honest in a lot of his answers. I think it really got me thinking about a lot of opportunities in product management to help founders. His experience going from $6 million to over $100 million, taking feedback from customers, really leveraging AI. If these things resonate, please take the time to share it with a founder who needs to hear it. We appreciate you tuning in, and we'll talk to you on the next episode of Startup Stories from the Treehouse. Thanks for listening to Startup Stories from the Treehouse. If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to like, follow, or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And if you found our conversation helpful, leave a review. It really helps other founders discover our show. For more insight and episode summaries, don't forget to subscribe to the Wildfire Labs Substack. We appreciate your support and can't wait to share more stories with you next time.